Escape Dead Island is a third-person action-adventure which takes place on a dead island. The goal, you might have guessed, is to escape, though there's a fair bit more to the seemingly simple premise, as there always is. This is a rather narrative-heavy game, with loads of cutscenes, voiced dialogue, and a ruinously slow opening hour. But it's not so much about the gameplay as it is the journey. And on that journey, we play as Cliff. He's a drunkard 20-something-year-old with a disapproving father, and naturally, he's got everything to prove. To his friends, to his family, to the world, and to himself most of all. As the story starts, Cliff seems unlikable and downright terrible, but as more layers of his psyche are peeled back across the journey, we learn just how deep his wounds are. He's determined never to be a quitter again, to follow through, to be responsible and dependable, to be everything his father thinks he isn't. It's ironically this desire to prove himself that puts him and his friends in life-threatening peril as they explore Dead Island. Their relationships begin to unravel, and so does Cliff's sanity. The story blends reality and fiction in a wibbly-wobbly, goobly soup. The world you're seeing may exist more to torment Cliff than it does to portray a logical sequence of real events. About a quarter of the way through the game, you leave your friends on a hilltop after one of them is bitten by zombies. As you go to find a cure, it's possible to return to that hilltop anytime you want, but they won't be there. They're just missing. You still hear about them over the radio, but that doesn't make any sense. They don't have a radio. And you see one of them is dead later, or maybe not, and you fall out of the sky like it's a glass window pane. It's a beautifully insane display of a man undone, all while he insists that he's got this. He's repeatedly transported back to his old college abode, again and again, as more and more of his demons pour into his mind. There are a lot of subtleties in his self-hatred. It's a slow creep, and seeing it crescendo so spectacularly as Cliff grows more desperate is as visually interesting as it is intellectually engaging. There's an overarching story even outside of Cliff's insanity as well, and it's told through the deranged, poetic gibberish of audio logs and the radio chatter which, again, you can't even be certain is real. To say I'm happy with Escape Dead Island's character, world building, and presentation would be a massive understatement. But the considerably complicated story and characters set to the side, how's the gameplay? Well, it's largely in service to the plot. You go places and do things because the plot needs you to, and you're playing as the character who must do those things. The game design exists, but it's secondary to taking you on an adventure. You'll be hacking enemies apart with melee, finding tons of audio logs and collectibles, and getting headshots, but without the framing of the story, it'd all feel pretty pointless. It's a fairly standard mix of hacking and slashing with increasingly powerful melee weapons and then blasting zombies' heads off when they're, sniping you at a distance. It's pretty easy to cheese early on, but as you progress through the game, you have to have acute understanding of the range of zombies, the exact moment you need to dodge, and the environment is built more like an arena shooter. It gets pretty challenging toward the end, and there's plenty of collectibles to find, so exploring never feels wasted. But again, it doesn't stand on its own legs, and it's all in service to the narrative. Because, you're not just blasting and slashing zombies for the sake of it, you're playing as Cliff, trying to survive in this fresh nightmare while his mind falls apart at the seams, and every new enemy encounter is even more justifiable when viewed from the perspective of him, rather than as a traditional game. And I sort of miss this kind of stuff. Perhaps it's just an unwelcome bias or a sort of nostalgia from games on the PS2, but I really like narrative-focused adventure games whose gameplay was largely in service to the story, and not necessarily meant to be enjoyed on just its own merits. All this just culminates in a game I deeply enjoy. I legitimately found Escape Dead Island to be more engaging than, say, Marvel's Spider-Man 2018 on the PS4. Does that make it good? No, but it's weird and I loved it. Stamp me with the official Escape Dead Island Appreciator label.